the big hurdle I had to get over was just because it was complex to make, or I put a lot of layers into it, or I used some really cool music, doesn't mean it was good.
Be sure to download the 10 free resources for church graphic design by going to smartdesign.church/graphics-resource. That's smartdesign.church/graphics-resource. What's up, everybody? I'm here with Alex Watson from pixelpreacher.net. And first of all, Alex, thank you for coming on the show with us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So today, we're talking about the 4 secrets to creating awesome sermon series designs. So Alex has come up with 4 different things, and before we really dive into this, I want to just talk a little bit about a breakdown tutorial style video that we did with Alex. You can check out that video by hitting that card up in the top right-hand corner of your screen, and you can check out that breakdown of a sermon series design that he's working on. But this one's a little bit different, but I think this video's just as important almost, because instead of talking about those techniques and stuff that might be a little bit more attractive, we're really more talking about your mindset and the things that you need to think about when you start creating your sermon series designs. Wouldn't you say that that's pretty important?
Oh yeah, totally. Got to start thinking through the process before you drag anything, or open up any program, or pull in any textures or anything like that. Is start breaking down what your main goal is, what the communication is going to be.
Right. And I think that's really where it all starts. Like, if your pastor gives you a topic, I mean, you don't just jump into Photoshop and you make some masterpiece. Like, you have to think about, okay, how can I tell this story, right?
Yeah, you're spending at least probably a day. I mean, sometimes ideas just will come to you, and everything is great and the cosmos are working in your favor, but most of the time you're spending, a day and a half or so just looking through what's out there, what works, what doesn't, what speaks to you, then you can kind of start moving in the right direction.
All right, so that is what we're going to be talking about today. So Alex, can you tell us, before we dive into the 4 secrets, can you tell us like what Pixel Preacher is and kind of the stuff that you're doing outside of Pixel Preacher, or even that it's involved with Pixel Preacher?
So for me, I'm a freelance designer, and I worked for a church for really in the church world for about a decade. Slowly started getting into design, mainly because they needed it, and they asked me, "Hey, can you make a logo?" And I said, "No, but I'll try." I made a lot of really bad stuff for a while, over and over and over again. So eventually, did some, started with video editing, then slowly moved into messing around with Photoshop and After Effects, and then. Luckily the church that I worked at really believed in the creative arts, and they poured resources and money into it to have a creative team, and let us try out plugins and different programs that we can use. So they gave me a lot of creative license to learn and to fail. I had to fail fast and figure out how to fix it and then move on. But then once I was there for a while, I learned a ton, and I realized there's just a need out there for quality design for churches. I don't think an administrative assistant or someone at the church should be having to make a design when there's talented designers out there that can provide those people with graphics. So there's tons of resources out there. I'm sure many people already use, but I wanted to try my hand at it, and so. Broke off from the church and started working on the website. So I launched Pixel Preacher, me and my good friend Pedro Oliveira. So we're both designers and have been designing for the church. So we wanted to make a resource where people could download full-on projects, a series in a box basically, and change it around. So there's a lot of resources out there that are kind of locked into the design. So they may find a really cool series on David or whatever, but they can't change the title. They can't do anything like that. So we try to make it super easy for people to do by, providing all the project files and a video tutorial to walk you through how to change it. So that's kind of been the goal for Pixel Preacher. So we're pretty young. We're only maybe 2 years on the scene, and we're just slowly designing and trying to make things, trying to make projects and add them up to the site as much as we can.
Cool. So what did you do before you were designing stuff? You were on staff at the church, but before they threw that logo at you, what were you doing?
I studied music, so I went to music school for a year in Atlanta, and focused on guitar and was going to do the whole singer-songwriter thing or worship leader thing, and did that for a little while. Taught some lessons, but sort of fell into it. I didn't study design. I didn't go to school for design. It was the first thing I did was I edited a bunch of clips of me and a friend of mine on a ski trip, and then I showed my buddy that worked at a church, and he was like, "Oh, you should come help me, edit kids videos." And so that's what I did. Would show up in an office and learn Final Cut, and go really really slow, make really bad stuff, and then so just over time, I'd start Googling, how do I do this? What's this button do?
Yeah.
All those sorts of things. So yeah, I think a lot of designers are self-taught, which is great. But to anyone who is just wanting to mess around with this stuff, like, take it serious and a few hours a week to trying a new tutorial. Find something that find a tutorial that looks cool and that you want to try. That way, it kind of motivates you to do it. So that was my goal. Is I would look at something, say, hey, that's cool. How do I do that? And then start Googling all kinds of different answers. Try to find the right one. So yeah. So it was I'm all self-taught. All the same things that people do with, Video Copilot and all those places. But yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned Video Copilot, and that was going to be my next question. Is like, most people who are self-taught didn't, just dive into Photoshop and they just learned everything. They went to the internet and asked those questions. Was there any resource for you that was kind of your default, like always waiting for them to come out with a new tutorial and you always just followed their stuff?
Yeah, in the beginning, I mean, definitely Video Copilot for sure. I don't know how much that helps new people that are wanting to learn motion graphics, because a lot of his beginner tutorials are like back when CS3 or CS, a long time ago. So I don't know how much those hold up these days. I would use like Abdesidu for a long time. I guess that's how you pronounce it. But now I use, I'm trying to get more into like Cinema 4D and 3D design. So I use Grayscale Gorilla a lot. Those are kind of the go-tos, and then just anything on YouTube or that looks interesting, and they have they're well done. I have a hard time watching videos that are like I can't really hear them, or the audio's bad, or they just put music over the top, and so yeah.
Yeah, cool. So we're talking a lot about the design part, but you also had to kind of figure out the mindset. Like, how do you tell a story through not just even a video, but through your graphics as well, and just all the non-moving, still little elements. So let's talk about that mindset. Can you give us the first secret to creating awesome sermon series designs?
Yeah. So the one thing that I had to learn quickly is to know the story you're telling. So that's kind of my first secret, if you will. And I like to say these are secrets, but more of the things that you can't really look up on YouTube. You're not really going to find tutorials on these types of things. So for me, it was know the story you're telling. So for me, the one of the big things I needed to figure out that this is the part I would skip. I would try to get into the design and make something super cool. But the part I would skip was figuring out the story I was telling. So my first secret, if you will, is know the story you are telling. Really break down look through maybe the pastor's notes or something like that and figure out where his communication points are going to be, and then start formulating your ideas. Don't just say, okay, we're going to do a series on Noah or Jonah or whatever, and just start throwing all kinds of stuff onto it. And that's what I would do, is I would try to make this grandiose, complex thing and think that, well, if it took me a long time to make it and it was really hard, then it's obviously really good. And that just wasn't the case. Is I would sit back and watch it, or I would have someone else watch it with me and kind of get their reaction from it. And if it was they're just kind of like looking with a blank stare at the end of it, then I missed the mark. So that's one thing I had to really figure out early, is that just because it maybe took me 40 hours to make it didn't mean it was going to be good. You might knock something out in 2 hours and it'd be way better. Mm-hmm. So it all comes down to what did you communicate in those 40 seconds, or in just your design in general, your still graphic.
Yeah. And I definitely fall into that trap too. And you can almost ask yourself, is it an ego thing? Like, I feel really good because I spent 15 hours on this project, but I mean, does it really matter? Because if it's not doing anything, if it's not telling a story, then what does it matter? So why would you say it's so important to tell a good story?
Yeah, so for me, whenever I'm making a design or kind of starting out something, I want it to feel like whoever's going to be looking at it or watching the video, that there's a world they're kind of coming into a world that already exists. So think of like Star Wars, how, you jump right into the story and there's all these names and planets and creatures and whatever, and you just kind of have to figure all that out, which I think is a lot of the fun part of listening to stories. And so for me, I like to feel like there's a world that exists outside of my 1920 by 1080 design, that people kind of have to figure out. And the scriptures are riddled with stories. Jesus spoke in parables, and the Old Testament is full of amazing stories. So that's a language that we all understand, and so I feel like you can convey that in your design, if you give it if you're more intentional about it.
And you mentioned Star Wars, and I think that's a good example of this. People love the Star Wars series because of the story. They don't think so much about the CGI and the graphics. I mean, like I watched the first, not the first in the series, but the first ever made Star Wars. What is that, episode 4 or something?
Yes, 4, 5, 6, and 7.
We're gonna say 4. I don't remember.
Yeah,
but I think it was 4. And so I watched that, and there was I'm not a huge Star Wars fan, if that's not apparent, but there was one of those ships flying through the scene, and in like 2 frames you could see a green box around it, and I was like, are you kidding me? But I mean, that slid through because no one cared. They loved the story, and that's what people will remember, is the story. They don't think so much about the graphics, but if they can feel some sort of emotion when they see your design, then that's really what matters. So I think that's kind of what we're touching on here.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that, obviously I'm not like a huge Star Wars fan either, but I can appreciate the storytelling aspect of it. And back in the 70s or whatever, it was groundbreaking as far as effects go. But now when you look at it, you try to watch it, and it can feel kind of cheesy or whatever, but the story holds up. The hero's journey, which is the same story throughout Scripture. Creation, fall, salvation, redemption. All the way over and over and over again in every story. So.
Okay, so can you tell us the second secret to creating sermon series designs?
For me, the second secret is to figure out exactly what emotion you want to convey, that you want the person looking at your design or your video, what do you want them to feel at the end of it? Do you want them to laugh? Do you want them to look at their partner and chuckle, or, talk about it? Do you want them to sit quietly, and do they need to take a breath after? Is it going to be a sacred moment for a worship or something? Do they need to separate themselves once the video is over, and kind of regather themselves? So trying to figure out what that is will change the direction of how you're gonna design it. So is it going to be super cheesy and quirky, or do you need to really hone in and try to pull on the heartstrings a little bit? Yeah.
So once you figure out what emotion you want, how do you convey that through graphics, like with color or whatever?
Yeah, so the way I would start was if I was being super sacred, then maybe I would start looking at other sacred works of art and how did they do it? Was it deep tones and deep colors, or if I'm going something quirky, maybe if let's say for instance, we did a series one time that was kind of a cheesy voiceover. This guy talking about like manly things for Father's Day, and I was like, okay, I want to kind of go towards like this Monty Python vibe. So then I kind of already have my direction. Once I know we're going to do this quirky thing, I'm not going to try to pull on heartstrings. I'm going to try to make people laugh, and I want to be as silly as possible. So then starting to go down that route, and I would go into Monty Python or all those kinds of little things, Princess Bride or whatever, to figure out that era, and figure out what works and what doesn't. And then how can I then take those little ideas and piece them into design with a little, jibber jabber mouth or something like that. Then it goes into music. What kind of music you're going to put on it. Researching what worked in those styles, and then finding some good resources for that and plugging it in to really make it work.
And what resources do you use to find the perfect music?
So yes, there's some great resources out there, especially now. I use Soundstripe a lot. It's a subscription basis, really good.
Mm-hmm.
Audio Jungle was a one I would go to a lot if you're looking for like big epic music or quirky kind of music. There's a lot of good stuff on there. They even have sound effects. Um, Premium Beat, the music bed is great if you have the budget. They have really good quality stuff, but it's very expensive. So if you're doing it for a client and they're willing to spend some money on it, then go for it. And then after that, it would be custom work. But you have to have right connections for that. Have a few composer friends, and so I say, hey, do you got some time? And can I throw some money your way to make this, score this just right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, music, man, the music and the beats really, really matter when it comes down to, especially like your motion graphics video or whatever. The way you cut it together and the way you end it just right. I spend a lot more time on that than I probably should, but I think it matters.
Yeah. So do you find that music first, or what's your process in that?
It depends. I would say lately, when I started out, I would start working on the design first and then just find some music that fit. And I think that kind of lessened the design and the delivery. Then I started saying, okay, I need to figure out, going back to those rules, figuring out what my direction is, what my goal is, what my time length is, and really what the script is. So, a bumper for me is 4 to 5 lines at the most, really short lines. So what I would do is I would go into Premiere and, track down some music, maybe 4 or 5 options, track down some music, throw those into Premiere, add little title cards, and then figure out what my beats are, where it's going to cut, what's going to be happening during these 13 seconds or whatever. So I would say in the past few years, I've really just decided what music I'm going to use first, and then begin piecing together the timing.
So what is our third secret to creating awesome sermon series graphics?
This one's pretty self-explanatory. I feel like knowing your demographic is pretty important. So I had to learn this sort of the hard way. I can have some weird music tastes, and especially when the communicators are 50 or above, they're the ones that are going to have to get up after my message, or my bumper. So I would, for a while I would just say, well, this is cool, and I know it's cool, so I'm just going to do it, and it'll be a fun video and it would communicate well, but does it really fit the people watching? Is it, if the demographic is 45 and over, for the most part, they're not going to think this weird music is enjoyable. So, one time I edited this bumper that was these like paint splatters and a bunch of colors and had this weird random music on it. And then the communicator got up and was like, well, there's that, like he didn't know how to react to it. And I'm just sitting in the audience. Like, oh, okay. I guess he didn't watch it before, and that's my fault. So really knowing what your audience is. Don't think that when you're creating a video, if it can't be just like you want it to be, if you focus on it, the demographic and who's really going to see it, remember that that's what matters, and that at the end of the day, getting them one step closer to Christ, or getting them one step closer to thinking about something on their spiritual life or being challenged, that's what it matters. So put aside your pride a little bit when you're trying to make something super cool and vibey or hip or whatever, and think about who's your main audience, who's going to watch it, and who's going to walk away from it feeling something or being challenged by it.
Okay. So what would you say in a situation where you have a church with maybe an older demographic, but you come up with some sort of sermon series design based on the sermon, and you feel like the best approach for that would be something more quirky? Like, do you try to tone it down a notch, or if it's an older audience who doesn't like that kind of stuff, how do you deal with that? Yeah,
for me, I would say have a few people that you trust that you can go to that are in different stages of life, especially that are, even churched and unchurched, people on your staff that are older or younger. Be willing to go to them and get some opinions. So don't close your door in your office and just work and say, my idea is the best and it's going to be great, because that's when you get the communicator falling apart on stage after your project because it was a complete miss. So be open to other opinions. Still want to trust your instincts a little bit, but then maybe try to find a middle ground and have have a plan B and spend time with that plan B or plan C, and realize that, okay, at the end of the day, this one's going to work better. And as cool as I think this one's going to be, tuck those ideas away for another day, because I'm sure they'll come back. So that's one way to go about it. The other way is to, if your church environment, church culture is okay with, maybe pushing the limit or taking certain creative risks, then go for it. Obviously get approval and all that good stuff. But, if it fails, that's all right, because you're going to have another series in 4 weeks, or you can make some tweaks for the next 6 days before Sunday rolls around again. Because I feel like, the church I worked at, we took a lot of creative risks that could have really failed, and sometimes did, but when they didn't, it was great, and it was a huge win. So, I think be willing to step out of that box a little bit if you can.
Mm-hmm. So you talked a little bit about your one experience with kind of missing the mark on, that paint splatter video, and the pastor, kind of being thrown off. So that, I feel, leads us into our last point. Can you tell the viewers what's your last secret to sermon series graphics is?
Yeah, so the last point for me was the biggest thing, and I think it's the most important, is when it's all said and done, make sure that your design and your video is setting up the communicator to win. You're not the one that's going to have to get up following a video bumper or whatever and deliver a message. The person that has put tons of thought into what he wants to communicate is the one that has to get up and deliver the message. So set them up to win. Don't let him or her have to break down what they just watched, or break down what, if you're showing your pastor, whoever that's going to communicate, show them your graphic, and then you have to explain it to them or break it down into pieces for them, then you messed up. So, they need to look at it right away and say, I get it. This is a series on Psalms. This is a series on whatever. Like, it just needs to tell that story, make sense, and set them up to win, so that at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, it's not about people walking away saying that's a cool video, or that's a cool graphic, or this bulletin looks neat, or whatever. It doesn't. None of that really matters. It's cool and it's great, but if it gives them like a memory of that series. But at the end of the day, what's way more important is the communication and what those people are walking away with from the actual sermon itself. Mm-hmm. So set them up to win as best as possible.
Yeah, and I think that's something we just have to keep in mind as media people and designers. Is it's very easy to get into our minds and get into our creative process and just be thinking about the graphics. But at the end of the day, like you were saying, it's all about reaching people for Jesus and changing people's life and transforming those lives through Jesus. So if our graphics can do that, that's great. But our graphics
definitely
are not what saves people's life. So that's what we always have to keep in mind.
Yeah, having I worked closely with a communication director when I was on staff, and a lot of times we would butt heads because I'm like, this doesn't look cool, or this is not a good idea. Mine is better. But then when we would work through it and realize that, man, she's talking a lot more. She's a lot more in tune with the pastor, and they're after a certain agenda or path that my design is not going to do. And so if that means I got to put aside my idea that I think is the best one and go with theirs, ultimately, like, it works there. So putting aside those things and making that idea, even if you don't quite agree with it, just buying in, buying in and making it as best as it can be.
Yeah. And sometimes it takes a little self-reflection to ask yourself, is this a big ego thing, or
exactly
why am I fighting this? I think this has been super helpful, especially for me. It's kind of just a reminder that, our graphics are not what saves people. So it's just a mental thing that we got to keep in mind as creatives. We can't just get into our bubble of, I'm going to sit here with Photoshop and After Effects and I'm going to save people's lives. Like, it's a much bigger picture than that. So is there any final thoughts that you'd like to give?
I think, what you just said, don't think that, I'm just pushing buttons on a computer or whatever and making pretty pictures or something like that. Like, it really, really does matter. Like when I was saying, like, I don't feel like there's certain people on staff that shouldn't be in charge of design. I know that sometimes you're short staffed, and I get that. But the design does matter. yeah, the design's not gonna, you're not saving souls with your design, but your design might grab a second look from someone who is unchurched. So if there's a flyer in the mail or a ad pops up on their Facebook, and there's a really compelling looking graphic, that might require them to take a second look or click on it or visit a website. So that really does matter. Playing a video that can tug on some heartstrings and is edited well and flows well and is not distracting, that stuff matters, and it really does matter in the long game. So as long as it's communicating well, then what you do can make a huge difference.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Is there any resources that you can point people to show people where to find you and what you're doing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, visit our site, pixelpreacher.net. We have a little chat feature on there. I'm on it most of the time, so say hello. Secondly, we have a Facebook group, facebook.com/group/sermon series design. So hop on there. We do tutorial videos on Photoshop and effects, and people share work and get feedback. So it's a great place to meet other designers and even other pastors that are trying to figure this whole thing out. So we have free resources a lot. So it's a good little community to be a part of.
Yeah, awesome. And I'm a part of that community too, and I can attest to that. It is definitely a cool community to be a part of. So all the links to everything that he's mentioning are down in the description below if you want to check those out. Alex, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, and I think we all got a lot out of this. For anyone watching, if you want to check out the breakdown video of a sermon series design that Alex put together for a client, go ahead and check out the breakdown video that we also have down in the description below. And you might also see it on the top card in the right-hand corner of your screen as well. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you to Alex for coming on the show, and we will see you in the next video.